This is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I have coming in from Denver, Colorado, Karl Gray. He's a investor in Bitcoin. He was a founder, along with Max Kaiser, of StartJoin, which is the world's first Bitcoin crowdfunding site. He's also starting up the world's first publicly traded Bitcoin hedge fund, which I'm really interested in, and we'll get into all of that. But the first thing I always ask Karl is, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, that's a big title. I guess I like to look at myself more so from an aspect of just advocating freedom for people. I know for a lot of people in the mainstream, the word anarchist tends to have some negative connotations. So I just like to advocate free people, free markets, and as much freedom as we can get out there.
And so were you always that way, or did you sort of change over time to believing in free markets?
I guess for me, it all started out when I started investing. I looked at it growing up in Ireland. There's a lot of regulation, a lot of stereotypes. And really, from my background, I just wanted to have the freedom to go out there and invest and make some money, start up some ventures, and quickly realized that, as I mentioned, a lot of regulation, a lot of requirements around doing that. And so I thought there has to be a better way, has to be an easier way. Started looking at historic examples of people who grew up in a time when they could just go out and start a company, start a venture and grow it into a multi-million or billion-dollar empire. We look at a lot of the big corporations today, whether it be GE, whether it be Ford, McDonald's, all had very, very humble beginnings. But one thing they did have was a lot of freedom, especially in the early days, to get going. And so, we can definitely see the fruits of that and the results of that today.
Yeah, the founder of Subway Restaurants, which was actually founded in the 70s or 60s, I believe. I was surprised to hear that. He recently, last year or a few months ago, came out and said that if he were to start Subway Restaurants in the U.S. today, it would be impossible to actually start it because of all the regulation. There's so much. Just to open anything in the U.S. today, of course, you need all kinds of health inspections and permits and approvals, and then of course there's all the taxation and regulation over every single thing that you do. So yeah, you bring up a great point that that is how economies flourish, and of course in the U.S. today it's just going nowhere but the wrong direction. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I love the United States. I spend quite a bit of time here throughout the year, and it's a great country. There's a great entrepreneurial people that live here, and the reason for that is the rich tradition of innovation and growing businesses. But of course, unfortunately, the United States appears to be heading down the track that Europe headed down about 100 years ago, where the government believed that it was its role to come in and take care of everybody, make sure everybody was safe. And of course, if you're insisting on a situation where you have ultimate safety, the window for innovation gets narrower and narrower. So a lot of people are saying, well, you know what, I just want a good, safe job. And I think that's something that I've heard more and more since 2008. There's this desire for, I just want safety, I want security, I want a stable paycheck coming in. And sadly, that I think is going to result in a decline, and it already is, in the American economy. Whereas if you go somewhere that I am very bullish on, China and Asia, that entrepreneurial spirit is just catching fire, and people are going out and starting businesses, starting ventures. And we're seeing the rise of China over the last 20 years is basically the fruits of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see what's going on in China, of course. It's really been booming because they've really opened up and allowed commerce to happen. And the Chinese people in general, I hate to generalize, but it's quite an entrepreneurial spirit there. I don't know how they got dragged into this communist thing for a few decades. And of course, 80 million people or some odd people died because of it. And that's usually the case. And it's also interesting to talk about safety. And a lot of people believe that, or they want a job with safety and security. And they believe that if they work for a government organization, for example, that they have safety and security, whereas that's not the case at all. All of these systems are on the verge of collapse. A lot of the pensions, especially Social Security, that a lot of people are counting on to be there, won't be there. So it's actually an illusion of safety that they're getting, and they're actually getting taxed a lot for it, and thinking they're getting safety when they're actually not. So it's kind of sad. But let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin, because there are a lot about Bitcoin. First of all, there's a lot of people sort of wondering what's going on with Bitcoin. About a year ago, it was around $50 a Bitcoin. Today, it hit a high of over $1,000, and now it's around $400. And it's been that way, actually pretty stable, $400, $500 range for a few months now. What's your take on where Bitcoin is at its current stage of its evolution?
Well, Jeff, I got involved in Bitcoin. The first time I was involved in Bitcoin was the end of 2009. I was introduced to it by a couple of friends who are very, very technology savvy. I am not technology savvy, so I kind of nodded my head and smiled for the first hour or two of the conversation. But the more I thought about it, the more we revisited the conversation, it became apparent to me that this was a protocol that had just an enormous future ahead of it. Now, in 2010, early 2010, I made a sizable investment in Bitcoin because I did believe that this was going to be a market that was going to emerge in a very similar way to the traditional finance market. So if we look around today, we have banks, we have credit cards, we have investments, we have hedge funds, commodity markets. And these all grew up over the course of about 1,000 years. So you go back to the 12th century in Europe, you had people basically providing credit facilities for armies that were on their way to the Crusades, right? You take a little bit further, you go to the 16th century in Italy, and you had the emergence of modern banking. Now, I was in London recently, and I got to visit on a couple of hours where I had nothing much going on. I decided to take a little walk around some of the historical sites in London. And when I say historical, I mean financially historical. And I visited the site of the very first commodities market. And it was actually in a pub. And so people, basically the merchants would get together over dinner or a few pints, and they'd say, okay, well, what are you selling this week? I'm selling corn. What are you selling? I'm selling wheat. And basically this was the very nascence of the commodities market. So as I was looking at Bitcoin, I thought, what we're really looking at here is not a new financial product. It's not a new asset class. It's really the very beginning of an entirely new economy. Now, a lot of people in the libertarian or anarchist movement find themselves either on one side of this conversation. They're either very strong on gold and silver, or they're very strong on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And there seems to be a bit of a clash emerging between the two. And my view on it is Bitcoin is not a competitor to gold and silver. It's actually operating in a completely different market. And really, as that becomes more and more apparent, we're going to see that, this market is going to grow up. It's going to have banking facilities, credit facilities, lending facilities. It'll probably have a derivatives market that will emerge. And all of this is going to rise up in parallel to the traditional finance market. So I think it's fantastic. That's why I really got involved. And, as far as the pricing goes, as you mentioned, it had a phenomenal run up over the last 2 years. We're in the middle of a correction right now. That's very healthy. It's very normal. People are asking me, when do you think the price will go back up? And I'm saying, well, 3 years ago it was $1, $2. It is up. The fact of the matter is we're in a correction right now. That may go on for a few more months. It may go on for a year. I personally think it's a good thing to have a correction so that the market can calm down a little bit. It's definitely got on the radar. So I think it's a good thing overall.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with everything you said about how exciting Bitcoin is. It's an entirely new paradigm in money and banking. And for people who haven't gotten into it or even figured out what's going on, you really should, because this is where a lot of money could be made, is in these markets. And Karl brought up a lot of great points. There's a lot of things that are needed that aren't out there yet, including banks that can lend Bitcoin, insurance companies for Bitcoin, and of course there's things like hedge funds. And Karl's starting up, I think July 1st, it's launching in on the AIM market in London, which I'm really interested to see, because I don't think there is any Bitcoin hedge funds on earth that are publicly traded at this point in time. So I'll be very interested to see how that goes. Tell us a little bit about the hedge fund, and also tell us what exactly it is. What are you planning on hedging exactly with the Bitcoin? Are you just going to be owning Bitcoin in the fund, or will you actually be doing trading within the fund?
So our goal is to provide an opportunity for people who are in the traditional finance market, whether it be hedge funds, banks, institutional investment organizations. Right now, they are standing on the sidelines looking at Bitcoin saying, this is really exciting. It's a little bit scary. It's going to totally revolutionize our industry. So we want to get involved, but we're not going to jump right into trading, Bitcoin or Litecoin or whatever the case may be. Obviously, there's a lot of volatility right now. With any new emerging financial product, you're going to have volatility. All you need to do is go back and look at the beginnings of the dollar. The first 20 years of the dollar's existence in the United States were enormously volatile. Look at the gold rush in California in the 19th century. There were fortunes made and fortunes lost almost on a weekly basis. So that's literally what we're looking at with Bitcoin right now. So I decided that one of the ways in which we could encourage these people to get involved with Bitcoin is to offer a product, offer a service that's quite familiar to them, a hedge fund being the route that we opted to go. So the fund is going to have a portion of its assets locked in Bitcoin. And then the other portion will be traditional assets such as stocks, equities, bonds, foreign currencies. And from a basic standpoint, it'll operate very similar to the traditional hedge fund model that people are familiar with. Now, we're adding another aspect to it, the fact that it's going to be publicly traded. So we jokingly say that what we're doing is creating the Bitcoin version of Berkshire Hathaway. But very seriously, that's where we're heading with this. We believe that the fact that we're getting into Bitcoin very early on, and I believe that these are the early days. This is a market that has centuries ahead of it. And so, we feel like we're getting right in at the cusp. And we think the potential is enormous. So as you mentioned, this is going to be something that's coming out this summer. There's going to be a lot of press and media coverage about it, so we're pretty excited about it. We're still getting all the ducks in a row, but I think it's going to be something that's going to be great, and it's going to also offer an opportunity to hedge against volatility in the market, because as I mentioned, you're going to have those equities, those foreign currencies, those bonds in there as well. So it's not unlike the Winklevoss product, the ETF that they're launching, which is exclusively Bitcoin. This is going to have a little bit more diversity to it. So I think there's going to be a great opportunity for people to make a lot of money in it.
Well, it's funny because you mentioned that a lot of people think it's scary or a lot of risk in Bitcoin. I actually see a lot more risk in things like government bonds at this moment in time. I think Japanese government bonds will be worth the paper they're printed on in the next year or two. Many others like them, especially throughout Europe, although it's going through a correction of its own right now from very high interest rates in Europe to quite low at the moment. But I think that's going to quickly go back up in the next year or two. So yeah, it's a very interesting time in the markets. And of course, Bitcoin comes along at just an amazing time. And you brought up that you heard about it in 2009, I believe, which is amazing. That's the earliest I've ever heard of anyone who's heard of it. Usually it's 2010, or myself, it was 2011. And of course, for some people, it's 2014. And for many people, it's probably 2016 or 17. And that's why it still is the early days. If you talk to most people on the street, they have no idea what it is. And so the potential growth of this, as more people figure it out and learn about it. And I just heard about college that had raised something like a few $1,000,000. I don't know how they did it. And they're going to give out $100 in Bitcoin to every student on the campus. And I thought that was amazing. I think it had something to do with Coinbase, or Coinbase is doing something similar. And I think things like that. And this is the other exciting thing about Bitcoin, is the people who are into it are so passionate about it. They're doing things like this. And the more that, if you can imagine, if every single student on a campus had $100 in Bitcoin, they'd very quickly figure out what Bitcoin is, and they'd very quickly get excited about it because it's so much easier to transact than traditional banking models. And of course, it's basically free as well, which is another very nice thing about Bitcoin. So it's going to be very exciting to see how this all progresses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't think of any product which has been more, or potentially can be more disruptive to the world's markets. The big example would be the internet. I remember in 1994, I got my first email address. And it was very exciting because you'd meet somebody who had an email address and you'd say, hey, I'll send you an email. And, it was very, very novel. And people, of course, came out and they said, well, yeah, this is a nice little fun thing, but it's really not going to go anywhere. Of course, Paul Krugman being the most prominent example, where he said it would have little more impact on the economy than the fax machine. But I don't necessarily blame Krugman for that, because nobody could really understand, how the internet was going to, or very few people could understand how the internet was going to change everything. And I think we're on the same track with Bitcoin. Right now, people only look at it from a currency standpoint, but there's going to be an enormous amount of uses for Bitcoin and for the other cryptocurrencies throughout the world. It's really the blockchain technology. That's really the heart of it. The ability to engage in contracts or communication in a distributed manner is just fantastic. And that's, as historians look back on this centuries from now, that's going to be the big key. The idea that power does not have to be centralized in order to have authority and in order to provide benefit and utility. And I think that's the big game changer.
Absolutely, and the whole world's going towards decentralization right now, including politically. We're seeing a lot of countries starting to secede, a lot of states starting to want to secede, including just recently Scotland, of course, and Venice has said they want to secede, and the Ukraine's a whole different story, but that's interesting to see. It's all moving that way. And going back to Paul Krugman, I do blame him for what he said, because it wasn't just an off chance that he got one thing wrong. That guy's been wrong on everything he's said in his entire life, as far as I can tell. I can't believe that anyone still listens to him. He said things like, of course, he believes in this Keynesian and very statist model of the world, very centralized. And he's said in public that he thinks that we should fake an alien invasion to improve the economy. And people don't laugh at this guy, or at least not a lot of people, or not most of the people, which I find just amazing. But just hilarious that he still exists in some sort of a way that is respected by some people.
Well, I'm glad that people like Mr. Krugman exist, because when they come out and they make statements, it allows me to say, okay, well, what's the other side of that? Maybe that's where I should be putting my money. But, one thing that has been interesting, I noted over the last day or two, is, of course, Warren Buffett, a very, very successful investor, has come out, and he referred to Bitcoin as a mirage, basically indicating, listen, there's nothing backing it. It's just internet magic money. And yet the wealthiest Chinese man has come out this week and indicated that he's going to increase his holding of Bitcoin. And I thought, well, I wonder, perhaps in years to come, in decades to come, if that won't be an indicator of the shift of power and wealth from the West over to the East. If that one decision won't perhaps be a Munich moment or a Suez Canal moment, where we can actually track the decline of one power and the rise of another. But I tend to disagree with Warren Buffett on that. I think that the utility, the backing behind Bitcoin is really what it can do, not necessarily what it's made of or what it looks like. The utility of Bitcoin is perhaps unsurpassed by any other financial innovation over the last 600 years.
Yeah, and you brought up that you're excited about Asia, and I am as well. I think you can see so much of the wealth of the world just going there now. Of course, China, so much of the world's gold is heading in that direction, and Bitcoin as well. Of course, in the last year, that was what really spiked Bitcoin up to above 1,000, in my opinion, was when the Chinese markets came online. And it's really amazing to see all that. And then going back to Buffett, he's another idiot in my opinion. He was a really good investor during the 60s and 70s and the 80s and a little bit in the 90s, but he really rode from the 70s and 80s, actually 80s and 90s, on the back of a massive amount of monetary inflation and an incredibly prosperous time, which was an incredible amount of innovation going on, incredible amount of productivity. A lot of it came on stream thanks to technology, which he still claims to not understand. And I believe him when he says that, because he doesn't seem to understand it at all from what I hear, what he says about things like Bitcoin. But he, in the last 15 years, he's just been your typical fascist, working with the government, doing deals so that he gets special things to invest in things like Goldman Sachs at a special rate. And he's still far underperformed gold since the year 2000. So Warren Buffett's done. And it's a whole new world. You can imagine, and not to totally slag on Buffett, because he was an amazing investor during the 60s, 70s. But he really is anachronistic. The world's changed dramatically. It's unfortunate because he is a great investor, a value investor. He's really excellent at being able to see value in companies and invest at the right time and things like that. But in today's world, the markets are so screwed up thanks to all the government involvement, all the central bank inflation, that you really can't be much of a value investor too much anymore. Everything's overpriced thanks to all the inflation. All this newly printed money is headed towards the assets in stocks and bonds. So it's a totally different time. But yeah, when someone like Warren Buffett or Paul Krugman says something about Bitcoin negatively, I look at that as well as being positive, because they've both been wrong, including Buffett on gold. He's always been a very anti-gold, which is strange because his father was a huge gold bug. His father was actually good friends with Ayn Rand, and he's almost like his adopted child or something with the way he is. He's become a total fascist, and he just tries to protect his assets and grow his assets through government control. And very interesting to hear. I didn't hear about that, about the wealthiest man in China saying he's going to increase his Bitcoin holdings, but I'm not surprised at all. Everything that seems to be smart going on seems to be happening more over in Asia, and all the stupid things going on seem to be happening more in the US.
Yeah, growing up in Ireland, of course, every March 17th we'd have St. Patrick's Day. And it's a very Irish tradition that all of our politicians would leave the country that week, and they would typically, when I was a kid, they'd go to America and they would try to court a lot of American political and financial power, and encourage investment back in Ireland. And of course, a lot of the growth that Ireland experienced during the mid to late 90s was because we were able to encourage, the likes of Intel and Dell and HP to come in. There was a very low cost, agile workforce, and so the country really, really grew quite well. But now, I was in Dublin for St. Patrick's Day last year, and all of the politicians were going to Asia. In fact, the Prime Minister of Ireland was in Shanghai with a beautiful waterfront skyscraper scene behind him, and was meeting with the political establishment there. And so for me, that was a big indicator that the balance of power is shifting, the balance of influence is shifting. Of course, China is snapping at the heels of the United States as far in terms of the world's largest economy. There are a lot of changes afoot in China. I think once the one-child policy is phased out, which there are indications that's coming, we're going to have the fastest growing middle class the world has ever seen. And so that's going to drive a lot of growth. And of course, China's got a lot of problems, and they will have a lot of problems over the course of this century. But I'm very, very bullish on China. I think they will, in large degree, solve those problems. And then perhaps in 100 years' time, their kids will be walking around saying, hey, how come we have so much debt, and how come there's so much inflation? And then maybe Africa will be the next big power from there. World history shows that no empire has been able to sustain its growth and its power and influence indefinitely. And so I think that the key is to be able to see where those winds of change are blowing and act accordingly.
Well, it's my hope, thanks to the internet, that we won't keep going through these cycles anymore, that people will wake up and realize that the things that were good and what produced all of the wealth and the good times was freedom and a lot of freedom. And once you start to institute all these government sort of things, which end up in all sorts of social programs and destroying a lot of money through bureaucracy and central banks, which are heinous, which are one of the worst things for prosperity on earth is central banks. People are waking up to that. There's a lot of people want to end the Fed now, and as well, all these fiat currencies are in a state of collapse right now. So we're going to see amazing times ahead. This is definitely an interesting time to be alive, and definitely a lot of potential for making a lot of wealth during this process, as long as you're awake to it. And many people who are watching this probably are. So hopefully that they'll be on the right side of this, because a lot of people will get hurt as these governments continue to collapse, especially the U.S. government and the U.S. dollar. And it's going to be very interesting. But why don't you let people know the name of your Bitcoin hedge fund, if you have a name, and any other information they can get on it, and anything else you'd like to let them know?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of ideas throwing around as far as naming goes, but I think we're pretty much settled on Bitcoin Capital. And as I said, there's going to be quite a bit of media coming out about that over the next couple of months. They can also check us out on StartJoin, which is the world's first Bitcoin crowdfunding site. So we basically encourage everybody to get on there, post their projects. We accept a whole variety of different cryptocurrencies, and if you have problems getting your project listed anywhere, on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, feel free to visit StartJoin. We're all about freedom, and we love to host projects on there and get the word out. So, but yeah, it's a great time to be alive. There's a lot of information flowing freely. I like to say that the great thing about Bitcoin is it's going to be one of the most powerful tools in getting information to people in a quick and free manner. And so I think that's why it's got a great future. I absolutely agree with you on that.
Great. So that's Karl Gray coming in from Denver, Colorado, and this has been Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
This is Anarchast.